Today's video is one that I'm actually pretty excited about. I picked up this 2005 Honda CRF450X trail version of the race bike, and I'm pretty excited to see what it's going to need, as I'm usually pretty excited until I get into it and I'm like a bit off more than I really should have. But hopefully this one won't be that way. Now, I was told, or the story goes, the previous owner attempted to repair this non-running engine on their own. They got as far as taking the engine out and found that it was basically too much work, or over their head, you could say. So they basically left it as that. Either that person or the person after that took the engine to the dealer, and the dealer told them that it needed rings. So my first guess on this is that this engine is going to be low on compression of some sort. Now, a lot of you guys watch my videos and you know my diagnostic techniques or what I might do. I want you guys to go ahead and pause this, or while the opening credits are rolling, put down in the comments what you think would be my first test on this, or course of action, or what would be your first course of action on this particular engine. Stay tuned. Now, obviously, my first course of action, knowing nothing about this engine whatsoever, is we're going to make sure that the rotating assembly, everything is doing what it's supposed to do. And that's going to start off by taking the valve cover off and checking the cam and all that stuff out. And then our first actual test that we're going to do is going to be a cylinder, no, not a fuel pressure test, a cylinder leak down test. Now, this does pose a little bit of trouble, seeing is that the engine is not in the frame of the bike. To do the cylinder leak down test, we have to make sure we lock this cylinder, this crankshaft is piston on top dead center on our compression stroke, and sometimes that can be sort of difficult. If the engine was in the frame of the bike, I would put it in high gear and hold the rear brake, and that usually does a pretty good job of keeping the engine from rotating. Other than that, what we have to do is lock the crankshaft off. With Honda, on the right side of their engine, there's a cover right here, and there is a hex or Allen bolt that's in here that we're going to have to hold with a large breaker bar of some sort. If it was one of the other three Japanese manufacturers, there'd be caps on the stator cover that I'd be able to put a 17mm socket on and hold it. Now, you might be asking me, why wouldn't I do a compression check on it? Well, these 4-stroke engines are not like your 2-cycle engines. If I had a 2-stroke 250, 125, I would just throw a compression tester on it, give her a few kicks, and that would give me the compression of the engine. Unfortunately, these engines here, because of the amount of compression that they actually have, they have a decompression mechanism on the camshaft on the later models. I would say like 2003 and later for Yamaha. Prior to that, they had a manual decompression, which was a little bit of a pain if you didn't really know what you were doing. So it never actually gives you a full compression, and some of these manuals will actually give you a spec where it should be in a range with the decompression, but there's a lot of factors that does not give you information on. So it could tell you the compression of the engine, but it will not tell you if your intake or exhaust valves are leaking, you got a bad head gasket crack somewhere, where our cylinder leak down test will tell us. And I'm going to go over that with you in more detail once we get this engine torn apart a little bit. So let's go ahead and do that now. Get you in here to take a look at this, and this thing is super clean. I don't see any kind of issues with looseness in the timing chain. I'm going to go ahead and get this on top dead center, and we're going to check our valve clearances just to make sure that that's not the issue. and we don't really have to go any further. Now, like I said, the dealer had told him that he needs piston rings, so he went out and bought himself a new set of piston rings, which I have here. So we may just take it apart and do that anyway. Next, the trick is to line up the mark on the gear with the line on the case. And you want to make sure you're on your compression stroke. And how you know you're on your compression stroke, none of your cam lobes will be compressing any of the valves. So the valve buckets are down underneath here, and then the one for the exhaust is right here. All of these will be pointing up and away. Now I'm going to go ahead and check my valve clearances. On the exhaust, they're calling for 0.28 millimeter plus or minus 0.03. It's very tight. I'll go with a 0.25, which will still be within spec. And that is too tight on this side. Next one down is 0.23, and that is still too tight. So this valve is definitely out of spec. 0.20 it measures out at, so we definitely have to put a smaller shim to open that gap up. Now our intake is 0.016 plus or minus 0.3. I don't have a 0.6, I got a 0.18 or a 0.15. So we'll start with the 0.18. And that is too tight. 0.15. That is within spec here. Too tight there. We'll go to 0.13, which will be our minimum spec. And that is fine. So the intakes are actually in spec. I have one exhaust that is out of spec considerably. However, that's not going to cause me a loss of compression issue due to the fact that it does have a gap. So it's not holding the valve open in any way, shape, or form. So next we need to lock this engine in place so it doesn't move for our cylinder leak down test. And not being in the frame, this is where it potentially becomes sketchy / dangerous. We're definitely going to have to be very careful here. So the trick is to keep this engine from rotating forward or backward. So what we need to do is put a breaker bar in, and we're going to have to strap it down to the engine so that it does not move. I've got my breaker bar in, I've got it secured as best as I can. At no time will I ever get anywhere near this bar while this cylinder is pressurized, as potentially up to 100 psi, and this can be dangerous if it actually spins. I'm going to use my OTC cylinder leakage tester 5609. This thing works pretty good. Now for this test you do need shop air. Alright, so let me start to pressurize this, see if it will hold, and then I'll get into what I'm doing here and what we're looking for. So far so good. Not spinning the wrench. Crankshaft is holding. Obviously what you hear is a little bit of bubbling. That's actually leakage past the rings. It's totally normal. How much leakage past the rings is going to be sort of where our issue lies. So what we're trying to do is pressurize this potentially to 100 psi. I don't think I'm going to go that high. I don't think I need to go that high. We'll try to get up around 70 or 80. This is our inlet pressure from our air line that we're applying into the engine, and this is going to show the amount of leakage. So like I said before, any kind of air leakage, which you hear up through here or into your crankcase, is going to be normal. It's going to be leakage past the rings. What we're looking for to not hear any leakage of is out of your exhaust port, through your intake port, and obviously if your cooling system is hooked up, we want to make sure that we have no air coming out of there. Up to 50 psi on the inlet, we have like 45 on the outlet. This is still basically within spec. What you want to see is below 15% leakage, you're in pretty good shape. Once you start getting more than 15%, you're going to start considering an overhaul. So now I'm getting a leak, but that leak sounds like it's actually coming from my O-ring on my hose. See if I can get a better seal on it. What tends to happen is this O-ring will start blowing out because it's really a small landing that it has to sit on. So the O-ring will actually blow out when you start getting to higher pressures. I'll try to snug it and do one more test, but honestly, this is not looking terribly bad unless this thing was smoking really bad. That's the only thing I can think, but I don't have any information on that. Alright, that's about as far as I'm going to go. You got 70 on the high side, about 63 on the low side. That's going to give us 10%. It's definitely well within spec. So now I'm pretty curious as to why they pulled this engine out. Now I think for the heck of it, I'm going to go ahead and do a compression check on this. Being out of the frame, this would normally be difficult. This is electric start. However, I think I do remember him saying something about the starter not working. Maybe that's the key to all our problems. Maybe it has a bottom end issue. I don't know. Let's see if she'll spin over at all for us. Definitely sounds like it's got some starter gear issues. Let me try this again. I got my jump box hooked up along with my battery charger. Let me take a closer look at this decompression mechanism and see if something is up with that. I'm going to go ahead and adjust the decompressor clearance, 0.35 millimeter. That's what they're calling for. Again, we need to do some adjustment on this valve, but well, this absolutely does have an issue with the starter. I cannot get the starter to roll this engine over with the compression tester in there. She's humming and making some noise, as you heard. So without it, she'll roll fine. So what I'm gonna have to do is go ahead and pull the starter out of this and get a starter ordered. Wow, that's a pain. Do you have to take the cylinder off to get the starter out? Wow, this is like some kind of Jenga puzzle. Wow, that's crazy. I think that cam chain tensioner is going to come off. When you take this off, you want to make sure that you're on top dead center, so there's no tension on your chain. And then obviously we're not going to rotate anything. Let's see if that helped. Yeah, that's the trick. I'm going to go ahead and turn this back in and reinstall it, just so we don't have any mishaps while we're waiting. I guess I feel like I should probably go ahead and just pull this cylinder head off. And since I got a set of rings, let's go ahead and take a look at all this stuff and re-ring it anyway. I mean, we've already got it on the bench, so. Little trick with these I like to do is just put a zip tie around them. So if they fall down in the case, you can pull them right back out. Make it easy, we'll go ahead and shim that valve while we're in here. Yeah, and we'll clean all that up real nice. Wow, that cylinder's still got a lot of cross hatching all the way up. Superficial marks. Of course, we'll measure it and make sure everything is good with it, but wow, pretty impressive. It certainly doesn't look like this top end is in bad shape at all. It's actually really good. We'll go ahead and re-ring it, obviously. A little bit of carbon buildup, but not bad. Wow, crankshaft's in really good shape. I drained the transmission oil down. Now we'll take this case off. It's fairly clean. A little bit of clutch residue. We'll clean all that up real good. Take these clutches off, do them in a cross pattern, little at a time. That'll help keep from warping anything. use caution. Sometimes they have a ball bearing either in this end or down inside. This thing's really clean. It doesn't look like it's ever been apart. Now they make a special holder for this inner clutch hub, but I like to just wing it and hope for the best. Keep track of your washers. When you take all this apart, there'll be washers and spacers that will go inside of here. That maybe could potentially fall off. You want to keep track of where they go. Now, there'll also be bearings inside of your clutch basket. You want to keep track of that and any other spacers that might be there. And here's our starter assembly. The starter clutch feels okay. I'm going to drain the engine oil, pull the filter, pull the stator cover off, make sure everything looks good in there. Might as well just go through it. Won't lose that spring. Try to preserve these gaskets so my cheap ass don't have to buy new ones. Everything feels real smooth. This has got a fantastic bottom end, really strong. Put a new top end in it. Throw a new starter in it. Clean everything up. Put it back together. Go for a ride. You know how it is. Well, all right, we got a beat on the situation. Let me just go order some parts and I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Got some parts. New front and rear brake pads, sintered. New starter motor. Got some gasket kits. And last but not least, while I'm in here, I'm going to replace this starter clutch as well. This one-way clutch. Just to make sure that there's no issues. Just to make sure that there's no issues with the starting system on this. You put this inner gear back in. It's notched. It only goes one direction. But now we have marks on the counterbalance shaft and on the crankshaft, which we'll have to line up. You can see those two marks are lined up. Again, this one is notched. And then your outer gear is also notched. Always tighten these incrementally in a cross pattern to keep from warping anything. I got the piston ring and oil control rings installed as per Honda's recommendations. This piston does not have an intake or exhaust mark on it. However, as you can see, the valve reliefs are larger on one side than the other. So obviously this is going to be the exhaust side, and the larger valves will be the intake side. Intake obviously be towards the back of the engine, exhaust towards the front. Always put a rag or some kind of protector on your crankcase to keep from this clip. If it falls out, it doesn't fall down inside the engine. And I'll probably do this off camera because there'll probably be some cursing and I don't want to offend the young ones. Since I'm installing new rings, I went ahead and did a very nice light hone on the cylinder just to reintroduce that crosshatch pattern a little bit. While I had the head apart, I cleaned up all the valve seats, cleaned up the combustion chamber, cleaned up all the valves, and went ahead and lapped them in so it'd have a good seat. And while we're in here, we're going to replace our valve seals. Now with these valve seals, the general rule of thumb on them will be the green ones will go towards the exhaust, brown will go towards the intake. Sometimes you get all green, sometimes you get all brown. You really have to check with your gasket maker's recommendations on that. But if you do have brown and green, green is generally going to go to the exhaust. Once I get these keepers installed, I like to use a 1/4 inch extension or a punch. Just give these a couple light taps to seat the keepers. Next, we're going to torque our head bolts down to 49 foot-pounds. And we're going to do this in a crisscross pattern incrementally. So we'll just split it up. I'll go 10, go back over them 30, and then we'll hit them with the 49. Oh, I think these little side bolts are supposed to be like 5 or 7 foot-pounds. Perfectly torqued. Now we'll put our shims back in. If you remember back at the beginning of this whole deal, we had one valve that was out of spec, so we need to shim that one in correctly now. I'm going to put all the shims back in their original locations. Since I went ahead and lapped the valves and had all this apart, I'm going to put my cam back on and re-measure my clearances. Well, re-measuring all this stuff, it 100% turns out that everything is in spec. This one actually tightened up just a little bit, so we're actually in good shape. We'll go ahead and get our cam timing set back up. Next, what we need to do is get this engine on top dead center, and a couple ways to do that. I like to put a long screwdriver down the spark plug hole, and then we'll just rotate it. counterclockwise until that, and as you see, we rock it back and forth. We want to get that at its absolute top center, right in the middle. To tell you're on top dead center, there's a mark on your cylinder, triangle, and then top of your flywheel. These marks will be lined up. You have a T for top dead center. Now from doing our valve measurements, our cam's already going to be in fairly the proper position. So basically these flanges should be pointing straight up and down. As you notice on the cam holder, you have 2 arrows facing out. That's going to correspond with your cam gear. You can see there's 2 marks, 2 little hash marks on the cam gear. When you mount this cam gear, these 2 hash marks will line up with those marks on your cam cap. And we want to make sure 100% that this stays on top dead center. One thing we want to try to do is keep the front of the chain tensioned more than the back. So we would rather have it tensioned in the front and have some slack in the back. And this may take a few tries. As you can see, our marks are lined up with our cam cap. Our flywheel timing mark is still lined up with our crankcase mark. Before we put the tensioner in, we got to remember that the starter was a little bit of a bear to get in and out, so the tensioner was in the way. What we'll do is put a little dielectric grease, or any kind of grease would be fine, but I like dielectric on the O-ring. Let's get this thing smooched in there. If we were smart, we probably would have put this thing in before we put the cylinder head on. Now at this point, what I want to do is make a couple of full revolutions and then recheck my timing marks. We're back on top dead center and our cam marks are lined up. So we're good. I'm going to go ahead and lube up the cam, journals, bearings, lobes. I actually want to run the starter here for a little bit and just make sure the starting mechanism is working. Yeah, another trick with these pesky valve cover gaskets that don't seem to want to stay in, and you don't want to load them up with that orange RTV. We use that dielectric grease, put some little dabs in all the corners, and then that gasket will not come out of there. It'll hold on there solid while you put it together.
Oh, look at that. That's nice and shiny.
Ready to go back in? Well, all right, I had to stop the recording because this show has a potential of being something that the family can get together and watch and maybe learn something about putting these bikes together. But this engine going into this frame makes absolutely no sense. I've never seen anything like it. Now, I pulled a lot of engines out of these race bikes, but this X, if you remember how difficult it was to get the starter in and out, that's how difficult it is to get the engine in and out of the frame. Now, I don't know if I was going at this the right way, putting it in. I only found one way to snake this thing in. It's like a magic trick or a puzzle of some sort. I actually had to take the valve cover back off, and I had to take the camshaft sprocket off to get this thing in because it's just getting caught on the frame. But I wanted to spare you a little bit of the aggravation that I went through. But anyway, we can fast forward to the engine is in the frame. I've got most of the stuff hooked up. I went to put the gas tank on and the petcock was leaking. So I ordered a petcock and we're going to get that together now and see if we can get this thing to start up and run. Top her off with some non-ethanol. All right, let's see if this thing will start up. Well, there she is. Sounds pretty good, running pretty good. There was some oil in the head pipe, which is dripping out and smoking a little bit. So obviously that's going to burn off a little bit. But this thing actually runs pretty decent, seems like. Pretty happy with the outcome. Our next step now is we'll take this thing out and just do a little bit of trail riding. I'm going to go out with a buddy of mine and the ladies today. I'm just going to go do some exploring in the woods. So we'll catch you in a little bit, and fingers crossed. Well, the starter seemed to work much better once the battery was charged a little bit, and I didn't have a problem for the rest of the day. Jeff and I had a little fun doing some wheelies in the field. Then we ended up taking this little offshoot into the woods, which is a pretty cool little uphill trail. Crossed a few streams and a few logs, which was pretty nice because it was almost directly across from this neighborhood. We felt that it might have been a little too challenging for the girls, being as they don't have a ton of experience yet. But it was a fun little ride up and down. We had to be careful of the barbed wire fences, which come up on you pretty quickly, unfortunately. But there's a ton of room back there, and we'll probably plan on getting some other trails carved out over the summer. It's a nice little place to ride. The bike to me felt pretty heavy, but very powerful. Very good feeling bike. Handled the woods and the trails very well. In fact, he's got a 2022 YZ450X and had no problem keeping up. We're not professional riders in any way, shape, or form, but was able to keep up, had a ton of power, and felt really solid out there. So basically, towards the end here, we were just running some hot laps around the outside of the field and just having a good time. Super pleased with the bike, the way it ran. A couple little minor issues I had, some fuel dripping out of the carburetor, and a lot of chain slap. But for just throwing the bike together and throwing it out on the trails, overall very pleased. So thank you guys for watching very much, and throw me a like, throw me a subscription if you're not already, and we'll see you on the next adventure.